The air was thick with tension in Washington. It was one of those rare days when everyone, from the White House to the Supreme Court, was on edge. The entire political landscape was about to shift, nobody knew it yet, but they soon would. I had just finished my breakfast when the news broke. It was a morning like any other, until the president's social media account dropped the bombshell. Donald Trump, never one to shy away from making waves, had just fired a direct hit on Chief Justice John Roberts. The tweet was blunt, pointed, and unflinchingly bold: "John Roberts has been compromised for too long. It's time to remove him. The game is over." Then my phone buzzed incessantly, the notifications flooding in faster than I could keep up. Political insiders were all over the message, dissecting every word, speculating on what it meant. The rumor mill was already churning. Was Trump finally going to move against Roberts for his controversial decisions? Could this be the moment the Supreme Court's balance tipped forever? I stared at my phone screen, every part of me bracing for what came next. If Trump was serious, the consequences would be catastrophic, not just for Roberts, but for the entire judicial system. As reporters scrambled to get answers, the political world shifted underfoot. Every pundit, every talking head was trying to make sense of the statement. Everyone knew this was just the beginning. It wasn't just a threat, it was a declaration of war. The next few hours felt like the world had just gone into a spiral. News outlets were practically tripping over each other, racing to be the first to report the latest developments. But amidst all the chaos, one thing was clear: Trump was playing a game of chess, and everyone else was still fumbling through checkers. It didn't take long for John Roberts to respond, or, more accurately, for his allies to respond on his behalf. A statement from the Supreme Court spokesperson quickly made its way to the media, trying to downplay the president's remarks. "The Chief Justice remains committed to his constitutional duties and will continue to serve the people impartially," the statement read, with an almost robotic tone. But the damage had already been done. Trump's words were like a ticking time bomb, detonating any semblance of political civility. The right-wing media exploded with praise, lauding the president for finally standing up to the judicial system. But the left? They were horrified. The words undermining democracy and authoritarian were bandied about in every liberal news outlet as the immediate backlash began to take shape. Behind closed doors, I could imagine the strategy sessions taking place. People were asking themselves, what did Trump know? What dirt did he have on Roberts? Rumors were already circulating that the president had something far more dangerous than a simple vendetta: he had leverage, something Roberts couldn't afford to ignore. The story wasn't just about a tweet anymore. It was about a potential showdown that could shake the very foundation of the U.S. government. It didn't take long for the White House to pivot. Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders stood before the cameras, her usual calm demeanor betraying a hint of anxiety. She began her daily briefing with the same practiced rhetoric, but the air was different today, charged, full of tension. Reporters weren't asking about trade deals or healthcare reform. No, today they were fixated on one question: what did the president mean? Sanders' response was cautious but direct. "The president has made it clear that he's looking out for the American people, and if there are concerns about the integrity of the judicial system, those concerns need to be addressed," she said, sidestepping the notion that Trump's tweet was a direct threat. But the truth was becoming undeniable: Trump was gearing up for something much larger than a simple public rebuke. Meanwhile, the political world was beginning to unravel. Senators and House members from both sides of the aisle scrambled for their positions. They couldn't afford to stay neutral. Everyone, from the most ardent Trump supporters to his fiercest critics, knew that what was coming next would change the game. It was no longer a matter of political strategy. It was about power, raw, unfiltered power. John Roberts, for all his years of service and measured decisions, was now under intense scrutiny. The question wasn't just about his competence, it was about his loyalty. How had Roberts allowed certain decisions to be made? Had he been pressured? The president's tweet left little room for ambiguity. And as much as Roberts tried to maintain his stoic composure, the cracks were showing. Whispers began to emerge about a secret meeting that took place a week earlier. Roberts, some of his fellow justices, and certain key players from the White House. The details were unclear, but the timing was damning. Had Roberts been forced to make decisions that benefited certain interests? Was this the leverage Trump had been holding over him? The narrative was being shaped quickly, and no one, it seemed, was prepared for the full force of what Trump had just unleashed. As the days dragged on, it became painfully clear that this wasn't going to blow over quietly. The media frenzy escalated, but so did the whispers in Washington's underbelly. What Trump had started was slowly becoming a full-blown political crisis. Behind closed doors, allies of both the president and Roberts were preparing for a showdown. Then, the first leak dropped. A prominent Washington insider, a former White House official, was the first to go public with an explosive accusation. According to their source, John Roberts had secretly met with Trump's political adversaries in the past year, specifically, high-profile donors tied to some of the most influential conservative PACs. The conversation, they claimed, had revolved around ways to influence key rulings in exchange for favorable future appointments. Roberts had vehemently denied any such involvement, but the timing of the leak was damning. It fit too well with the narrative that Trump was pushing. The public perception began to shift. No longer was Roberts just a figurehead, a neutral arbiter of the law. He was now being painted as a political pawn, a man whose allegiance was in question. And once that doubt was planted, it took root quickly. Trump's base, which had already been riled up by the president's tweet, began calling for nothing short of Roberts' impeachment. Back in the Senate, some Republicans were caught in an internal tug-of-war. There were those who were ready to back the president no matter what. These were the same individuals who had long resented the establishment and who now saw an opportunity to topple what they viewed as the judicial elite. But others were hesitant, worried about the fallout. The idea of removing a sitting Chief Justice was unprecedented, and risky. And then, Roberts made his decision. He wasn't going to wait for the storm to consume him. The Chief Justice, in a last-ditch attempt to regain control, agreed to testify before Congress. This would be his chance to clear the air, to offer his side of the story. But the questions from lawmakers were coming fast and hard, ones that he wasn't prepared for. The day of the testimony arrived, and the eyes of the nation were locked on Capitol Hill. It felt like the entire political fabric was on the verge of tearing apart. The stakes had never been higher. Would Roberts stand firm and defend his legacy, or would the pressure finally break him? As Roberts took his seat in front of the Senate Judiciary Committee, the atmosphere was thick with anticipation. Every camera in the room focused on the Chief Justice. He appeared composed, yet there was something in his eyes, a flicker of uncertainty that hadn't been there before. Senator Lindsey Graham, the chairman of the committee, opened the session with the kind of calculated politeness he reserved for high-stakes hearings. But everyone in the room knew that behind his calm exterior, he was playing his own game, navigating the delicate balance of staying loyal to Trump while also ensuring that the judiciary wasn't irreparably damaged. Chief Justice Roberts, Graham began, "Thank you for being here today. The question before us is simple. Has the Supreme Court been compromised in any way by external influences? Specifically, have you, in any form, engaged with political interests that could have influenced your decisions?" The room fell silent. The question was direct, almost accusatory. Roberts's hands tightened around the edges of his testimony folder, but he took a deep breath before responding. "I have served the Constitution with utmost integrity," he began, his voice measured. "My decisions have always been guided by the law, not by any external influence." But the room wasn't buying it. The questioning continued, getting sharper with each passing moment. Senator Chuck Grassley, a longtime ally of the president, zeroed in on the rumors that had been circulating for days. "Did you ever meet with President Trump, or anyone from his circle, about cases that came before the court?" Grassley asked. Roberts hesitated, visibly uncomfortable. The question was far more pointed than he had anticipated. He responded carefully, "I have met with many people in my career, including members of various administrations. But no, I have never discussed pending cases with any politician or political figure. Yet the moment those words left his mouth, the damage was already done. The entire room seemed to collectively hold its breath. That subtle hesitation, no matter how fleeting, was enough to fuel the firestorm. The media, who had been waiting for any sign of weakness, pounced. Headlines across the country blared the same question: was Roberts hiding something? Outside the Senate chamber, a storm was brewing. Trump's allies were already preparing their next move. The president, from his Twitter perch, was already making it clear: the truth is out. Roberts can't hide anymore. It's only a matter of time. Drain the swamp. The testimony had set off a chain reaction, and by the time Roberts left Capitol Hill, the situation was rapidly spiraling out of control. The Senate hearing had done more than expose a crack in the Chief Justice's armor. It had ignited a political firestorm that no one, least of all Roberts, was prepared for. News outlets couldn't stop talking about the hearings. Every political show, every news program was dedicated to parsing his words, analyzing every nuance of his responses. Experts who had once viewed Roberts as an impartial arbiter now questioned his integrity, his ability to lead the court with the respect it once commanded. The political ramifications were immediate. On one side, Trump's supporters were ecstatic. They had won this round. The president had succeeded in casting doubt on Roberts' impartiality, and it felt like an inevitable step toward dismantling the court's credibility. His followers were louder than ever, rallying behind his call for a full investigation into the Chief Justice's conduct. The word impeachment was on everyone's lips, a buzzword that couldn't be ignored. But on the other side, the fallout was far more complicated. Democrats and moderate Republicans, who had once been cautious in their dealings with the president, were now forced to react. The impeachment calls were gaining momentum, but they knew that pushing for Roberts' removal could set a dangerous precedent. They feared it would irreparably damage the independence of the judiciary, a foundational pillar of American democracy. Roberts, however, wasn't ready to back down. He had weathered public storms before, but this was different. The pressure was unlike anything he had ever faced. His reputation was hanging by a thread, and his future on the court was now uncertain. He knew that his options were narrowing. Behind closed doors, Roberts' closest allies in the court were already beginning to question their positions. They too were facing immense pressure from both sides. Some were advocating for a united front, urging him to stand strong and continue fighting, while others were quietly suggesting that the time had come for him to step down. The thought of voluntarily vacating the position he had held for years weighed heavily on him. But Roberts wasn't a man who surrendered easily. He had spent decades carving out a legacy as a conservative force within the judiciary, and he wasn't about to let it all slip away without a fight. Then, as if on cue, another bombshell hit. A whistleblower from within the Supreme Court's inner circle came forward. This time, the accusation wasn't about secret meetings with political donors or influence from outside sources. It was far worse. The whistleblower claimed that Roberts had been actively involved in coordinating the court's rulings on major political cases, not just as an independent arbiter, but as a leader orchestrating decisions in favor of political interests. The whistleblower's name had yet to be revealed, but the impact was immediate. The call for Roberts' resignation grew louder. This time, even some of his closest allies began to doubt his ability to continue as Chief Justice. The storm had reached its peak. The whispers had turned into a full-on roar, and Roberts knew there was no escaping it. The situation was untenable. His legacy, once solid and respected, was now reduced to a political battleground where every action, every decision, was scrutinized under the harshest light. The whistleblower's revelations had rocked Washington to its core, and the fallout was catastrophic. The Senate Judiciary Committee had called for an emergency hearing, and Roberts was expected to testify once more, this time under even more intense pressure. The entire country was watching, waiting for the man who had once stood as the supreme guardian of the Constitution to explain himself. But no explanation would suffice now. Too much damage had been done. In the days leading up to the hearing, Roberts retreated from the public eye. The media was relentless, and the political factions were locked in a high-stakes battle to decide his fate. Trump, meanwhile, was not backing down. Every tweet, every public statement was designed to add more fuel to the fire. "The truth is undeniable now," he said. "John Roberts can't keep hiding. The Supreme Court needs a clean slate." The hearing itself was brutal. Roberts, his face ashen, faced an array of tough questions from both sides of the aisle. The once immovable figure had become a man trapped in a web of his own making. He denied the accusations, of course, but the damage to his credibility was irreversible. It was clear to everyone in the room, Roberts was no longer the Chief Justice the country once revered. He was a man under siege, and his ability to lead the court had been shattered. In the end, the Senate vote was a formality. The calls for Roberts' resignation had grown so loud, and the evidence so overwhelming, that even his most loyal supporters couldn't hold the line anymore. With a resignation letter in hand, Roberts announced that he would step down from his position as Chief Justice, effective immediately. As he left the courtroom for the last time, Roberts knew that his departure marked the end of an era. The court would never be the same again, and neither would the political landscape. The moment Trump had set in motion with that fateful tweet had altered the course of history. The game had, indeed, changed forever.